Welcome to the Week in Mobile, episode number 4, recorded Saturday, February 12th, 2011. Ladies and gentlemen, Microki, or was that Nokia soft? In this episode, WebOS rebounds, off the rim and out into the abyss. Stephen Elop's bold decision, HTC gets into video and gaming, and could Apple reduce the carrier to a simple app? All this and much, much more coming up right now on the Week in Mobile. Hello everybody, welcome to the Week in Mobile, episode number 4. Can't believe we've done 3 of these and we've actually made it to number 4. My name is Rob Woodbridge. I'm one of your hosts from Untether.tv, probably where you're watching this very podcast. Up directly above me and off to your left is Anthony Rizk, who is the founder of Zebu Mobile. Anthony, also the author of Beginning BlackBerry Development. Mm-hmm. Welcome, Anthony. Glad to have you here again.
Thank you. Glad to be here again.
And directly above me is Mr. Jeff Bacon, formerly of the Suave Hog, now Director of Mobile Strategy for a local company here in Ottawa called BitHeads, a global player. God, Bacon, I can't believe they wrangled you in.
Yeah, it took a little bit of convincing to get me to come back out of retirement this early, but it's a great opportunity. And when they said, "How about your first day is heading to San Francisco for GDC?" I was like, "Oh, all right, fine. I guess I'll come out of retirement a few weeks early to go to San Francisco." So,
do you need a helper?
Someone could carry my luggage. I have one carry-on bag. That would be helpful.
That would be fine. I will actually check my luggage and carry yours on for you. Well, that's great. So that'll be in a couple of weeks that you start. Your retirement was short-lived, and but welcome to the workforce. Being a productive human again is always good.
I like to think I'm productive in my downtime as well, but really I'm not.
No, you're not. The stuff that, Hawaii for 3 weeks, that's not productive.
Productive for my tan.
Exactly. Productive to learn how to snorkel. So, we're doing this again. Obviously, this was a colossal week in the world of mobile. Lots of announcements, and it always seems like there's lots of announcements, lots of kind of tectonic shifts going on in the industry right now. And we're only talking about 2 players here that really made some massive announcements this week. And we'll start with the very first one, which is this big doohickey. I don't even know what I would call it, but that HP put on about WebOS and their platforms, and launching the tablet and a couple of other devices. This was big because Palm is dead as of this week, this past week, and HP is adopting everything. I mean, they're calling it the Pre, but it's the HP Pre, like they did with the iPad. What do you guys think about what their strategy is about launching WebOS and certainly a little bit deeper into the device side, a tablet announcement, and then this odd thing which is WebOS on top of Windows as another platform, or as a basically an overlay onto Windows. So let's start talking about, first of all, WebOS. Does it matter anymore? Are they too late? Is this a niche play? I'm a Palm guy. I loved Palm. But is WebOS too late is HP too late to the market right now?
Well, you can never say never, but WebOS is now like the 5th horse in a race that's dominated by 1 or 2 huge people up at the front. And for all that I've heard, I think I've never actually played with a Palm Pre, but I've heard that WebOS is fantastic. But yeah, I think it just doesn't. You look at the thing, it just looks like another iPad. And you're thinking, well, this is like an iPad. It's going to cost the same amount, but it's got like 100 apps instead of 200,000 apps. Nobody's got one. How long is it going to be around for if I buy one? I can't imagine it. And they're trying to do some strange things, and it shows sort of how different it is. I'm going to tie in the one company we're not supposed to. We haven't thought about talking about this week is that. So RIM with the Playbook is talking about integrating with the playbooks, BlackBerry's email and calendaring and everything to try and leverage, BlackBerry customers as playbook buyers. Yep. And part of the tablet OS, or the tablet touchpad announcement was that you do the same thing with your tablet and an HP or a Palm Pre device. So there's some kind of integration where you could send URLs back and forth and everything. And I thought, it shows the difference, right? That sounds kind of cool for those, like, 1,000 users of the Palm Pre that there are actually out there. But you're basically trying to leverage a platform that's already dead to try and bring another platform to life. That it just, I don't know. A huge uphill to climb.
Well, what's funny though? Don't you remember that that Palm came out with that Folio product a number of years ago, right? Maybe we should credit Palm with the obviously the handheld device. Pretty much invented the PIM with the Palm 3. But they also did. Would you consider that they invented the netbook with that Folio? It was a complete disaster. But isn't RIM just doing the same thing with their playbook right now? Marrying it to the BlackBerry, basically what we've heard.
That's an interesting. You were getting into an interesting tangent here. This is so everything old is new again. I mean, tablets have been around for ages, right? So you remember Windows Mobile with the pen computing and everything, like 7 or 8 years ago, right? The thing is, everyone is talking tablets again. What's interesting in the tablet market is that there's no success. There's no tablet market. There's an iPad market, and everyone is, they attach, whenever they talk about the iPad, they attach, and the Android tablets and whatever in the playbook and all that, sort of out of a sense of being complete. But there's no other market right now. Apple has a market. They've got a device. They've got the iPad. There's a couple of others that are sort of in similar form factors that you might say are similar types of things, but, I don't know. I think there's no. They might have created something, but we don't really have a full market yet. There's no competitive market. There's an iPad, and there's everyone else that's trying to do something similar. But we're so early on what's going to happen.
There was no market for a small QWERTY device to type emails on either before RIM came out with their devices.
That's it.
10, 15 years ago. So I agree. At the moment, it's mostly an iPad market, not really a tablet market, but I think the iPad is showing that there is a market for that style of device if you do it right. And there's lots of people that look at the iPad and say, the iPad isn't for me, but I could see myself using a similar style device. So that's why you're seeing, the Samsung device, their Android device selling incredibly well, and RIM coming with their playbook, and I expect it to sell pretty well too because its niche market will be a pretty decent size. And the HP tablet coming out with WebOS on it, I'm not sure how many devices HP ships, but back when they did Windows Mobile on all of their handheld devices, they sold a lot of devices. HP and Compaq sold a ton of handheld devices with Windows Mobile on it.
And
well, bad for you. But it's a kind of interesting shift in HP from before when they had a handheld market that they sold. I don't know if they sold the majority of Windows Mobile devices, but they sold a huge share of the market on it. So, but they gave away their OS to Microsoft to build for them. So now they bought an OS to build for their devices, and I think they expect that they can sell using their channels, and they have a huge channel infrastructure at HP from all the years of selling every piece of equipment to offices around. So they're going to leverage that to try and get their tablets out into businesses. But will their tablets from one company be able to sell at a volume that an Android tablet or an iPad will? Probably not, but neither will the RIM playbook. And the RIM playbook is going to leverage its BlackBerry install base. So, HP has advantages for selling tablets in its channel system, and some of those people don't really care about having 200,000 applications because if your office is buying one for your office worker, what you care about is that the applications they need to use to get business done are available. So I think there is a market there for it, but I think the problem they're going to have is they're going to guarantee themselves a niche market by using WebOS and not one of the more popular OSs that are going to attract a ton of developers.
Yeah, we're going to come to that conversation in a minute because, there's been a lot of comments about the WebOS, especially on the tablet side, and whether or not they're going after the consumer or the enterprise. And I don't see that this hooking up very well to a Windows Server and Exchange environment with security wrapped around it, and it might get there. But, I mean, you think about HP's install base, and HP servers, there might be an opportunity for those guys to be able to extend it to this point. But I think there's obviously a monumental challenge. But there's been some big announcements and big bets this week, and change is very difficult. And two big companies like HP, and we'll talk about Nokia in a second, have made bets, right? They see the competitors actually closing in on them and basically cutting off their air. and they're making bets now, which is better to do than to just sit back and wait for your very last decision, which is usually to sell your IP.
That's Yeah, it's true, and they've got something. I think that they will sell some. I think the same is true of Playbook. I think Playbook will certainly sell very well in the first few months. Whether it has more legs than that, I don't know. But it is, and one of the other things that's interesting is that you're seeing that. So the Galaxy Tab 2, that was I think it's a Mobile World Congress announcement, and this one, the tablet or the touchpad, and the Motorola Zoom, they're all converging on the iPad form factor. So they all started off at the 7-inch, and they're all to the 10-inch form factor. So they're figuring it out. They're figuring out that basically, I don't know. I think it's a little bit of, like Jeff said, it's definitely, they understand. They've got the channel. They understand how to sell to their customers. But a little bit of it is that Apple's got some kind of crazy voodoo magic with product design, right? So they put out stuff, and a year ago, you look at what people were thinking about the iPad. They're like, what the heck, a tablet? The stupidest thing in the world. Who would announce something like a tablet? What is it going to be? Some kind of e-reader with social features or something? Nobody got it. A year later, we're all talking about how tablets are obviously the next big thing. It's blindingly obvious. So they're figuring out what Apple's done. They're going to get close, and it's going to be an interesting race. But Android did it with. Android is doing a pretty credible job against iPhone, so we'll.
And I think that what I've read about this, and I've seen some of the video from the WebOS and the tablet, the HP touchpad. What they're talking about is it's the closest or most similar experience to the iOS. In fact, they say that and I've seen it. It makes the iOS seem outdated, right?
Yeah.
So even Android doesn't compare to this, and we've seen just videos of the Playbook right now, but I think that they're probably similar in the way that they handle a lot of things. But again, it's a tablet, and the idea of integrating another operating system into an already very cluttered ecosystem inside of a company or in my house, it just doesn't. I don't know. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. At the same time that they announced this, obviously they announced a couple of devices, including the Veer, which is this like a small device, like it's literally kind of fits in the palm. It makes the Pre look big, and this is it's I think it's got a 2.6-inch 320 by 400 screen, and 8 gigs of storage. It's like a mini phone with the WebOS, and I could see that being fairly popular, right? Depending on the price point.
That's really interesting. The Veer is really, really interesting. So there's a class of people that don't want these big clunky smartphones, right? There's those of us who use them, we love them, but there's a huge class of people who loves their little Nokia, whatever, their Motorola or their LG, dumb phone, just because they're small, they want to make phone calls. But if they had a little bit of a smartphone to them, so they could do one or two things, maybe they're interested in Twitter or more likely Facebook. They could do a couple of small things. There probably is a market. It's just figuring out, how to sell that kind of phone to somebody, and if it's going to be a huge price premium, I don't know. But that's. Go ahead, Jeff.
I say and this is the crux of where HP has a challenge, in that medium and large size devices can be productive business devices. You can legitimately say, I can do more work on these devices. I can save paper by handing the tablets around instead of printing stuff out, or taking sheets around and notebooks. You can use them as replacements for that. You can be productive on these larger screens. When you get to the small form factor devices, it's hard to make the business productivity argument for those devices. And HP's biggest strength is access to business channels. Yeah. People buy HP products through business channels more frequently. So their consumers, or their people that they're marketing to, or their channels that are opening to them, are on the business side. So I really don't see the usefulness of this small form factor device, because that's a device in which more consumers would be interested in, except now you're in the consumer market, and now you have another Android device which has 200,000 apps instead of 1,000 apps. And that's, who cares? The consumers care. So I'm not sure how it competes against other forms of smartphones which have a much higher level of consumer content available on them than just the small phone.
Well, they certainly have to do a better job of advertising than they did with the Palm Pre, because that Palm Pre ads were terrible. They didn't really make any sense. But I mean, I can see this. It's got a slide-out QWERTY keyboard. You know, this might be, if you are new to the smartphone world, and you're used to a chocolate bar phone, you know, one of the standard size phones, this thing could be that next step up for you as a consumer. Even if there aren't 200,000 apps, you know, you might only need 10. You know those statistics that you only use 5% of the apps 30 days in after you've downloaded them anyways. Even these are free apps. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we know that, but a consumer standing in line and seeing a 8x10 foam board up in front of the one set of phones that says 1,000 apps and has some logos on it, another one where it says 200,000 apps with a bunch of logos, consumers will think, oh, look, more choice over here. Maybe I'll find something more interesting to get. So why would I buy an equivalent phone with 1/10 or 1/100th the amount of apps available for it when the other one's sitting over here? And it's probably cheaper because it's probably made by some no-name manufacturer in the middle of nowhere and have paid nothing for their Android OS. And so they're able to undercut the HP price point by $100. It's really hard to make the consumer argument when they're side by side.
So bottom line, WebOS relevant or not relevant?
No.
Not unless you're building enterprise apps.
Yeah. Yeah.
So past its day, done.
I don't think it ever had its day.
Yeah, it never was.
It never was.
Never was. Yes, unfortunately, great technology, great UI, great OS, but just never had a chance.
Yeah.
Well, so now let's switch gears over here because let's talk about the burning platform. Stephen Elop, Nokia, what are we calling? Microkia, Nokisoft, whatever you want to call them now. The long-standing rumor was finally laid to rest when they announced it. I think it was early Friday morning that Nokia is obviously going to not only just embrace mobile, it's going to be the leading platform. Windows Mobile or Windows Phone 7 is going to be the leading platform for Nokia going forward. First of all, not a big surprise. We saw this coming. Everybody saw this coming. And then when Stephen Elop, this memo became public, which is called the Burning Platform, which is so appropriate. Everybody knew something was coming, and it was just a decision between Android and Microsoft, and obviously Stephen Elop, being the ex-Microsoft exec, chose his buddy Steve. So Steve and Steve getting together. So we talked about this last week, but now that it's happened, what are your absolute thoughts on this? You think this is good for Nokia, or is this good for Microsoft, or both?
I think it's an interesting case of, on one side, and I might contradict myself in a minute here, but on one side it's really good for both companies, in that Microsoft needed a high volume manufacturer to adopt Windows Phone 7 in order to get the volume of Windows Phone 7 devices out there to get developer adoption by getting customers. And Nokia needed a partner that needed them as well. So if Nokia is talking to Google and saying, we might want to go with Android, what are you going to do for us? Google's saying, well, we're selling how many millions of these devices every week, and we don't need to.
Not so desperate.
So, yeah, take it or leave it. And Microsoft
download
well, let's work with me, let's see what we can do. So on that sense, it kind of works for both companies in that it was kind of win-win. But on the other side of the coin, Nokia is giving up a lot of control over their ecosystem to Microsoft. They have more control than Windows Phone manufacturers, but not giving up all control over it, because their deal with Microsoft, which is never going to be, or not going to become public except in bits and pieces over the next 5 years, is going to give them much more leverage in terms of what they can do with Windows Phone 7. But in the end, that might kill Windows Phone 7, because part of the appeal that Microsoft wanted to solve was this fragmentation thing, and having, here's our reference platforms, these are the only reference platforms that you're going to have to deal with, that's going to be our big solution. So, on one hand, they both needed each other, and it was a kind of a match made in heaven that way, but I think it could blow up in their faces over time, that even though they'll get Microsoft immediately from a 0.3% share, or whatever their Windows Phone 7 is at, to potentially a 15% share, I'm not sure that it's sustainable over time.
Think about this, though. The integration of this relationship. So Stephen Elop, got to call this out. He's a Canadian guy. In fact, I had him speak at a conference that I used to run maybe 7 or 8 years ago, back when he ran Macromedia. So a seasoned veteran, obviously seasoned CEO. I'll come back to Stephen in a second, but what they're talking about, the integration between these two companies, is something staggering, because there's a great statement that came out from Schmidt before he was summarily dismissed as the CEO of Google, that said, you know, our goal for Android, wouldn't it be great to get Android on 1 billion devices, because 1 billion devices means that everybody's using us for search, and that's really what this battle is. Mobile is a battle of local search. We've always gone over this. So Microsoft, who has steadily grown, you know, has actually competed fairly well against. So Bing versus Google. Bing has actually increased their share percentage of searches by quite a lot over the last couple of years since Bing's launch. This is monumental, because integrating Windows Phone 7 into Nokia devices that are being distributed around the world, their primary search engine, their only search engine on those devices, is now going to be Bing. So there's a huge marketplace, and that's part of the deal. Bing, integration of Bing into Nokia devices, huge, 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 huge. Obviously, the future collaboration on further development around the operating system itself. They're going to be integrating Nokia's OV Maps into as Microsoft's mapping platform, and they're basically combining the two stores, right? So whatever Microsoft Store, App Store, and Nokia's app stores are going to be combined into something that's a little bit larger than both of them now, but not as big as Android or iOS. But those are pretty significant plans for a roadmap for these companies, and it's more than just you know, a friendly partnering here. This is like, you know, basically they've abandoned MeeGo and are keeping Symbian for the dumb phones, for the feature phones.
Yeah.
So this is an all-out play. So Stephen Elop has basically changed Nokia. You know, what Om Malik calls Nokia's you know, Raj or reign is now gone. And I've even heard speculation today that there's talk about, you know, there's speculation that this is just the beginning of the merge between these two companies, between Nokia and Microsoft, which is interesting, because I always thought that Nokia should have bought RIM. So this is big. This is big.
There's so many levels to this, right? So it's, I mean, on the product level, I think it's a really, really good match.
Yeah.
I think just in terms of in terms of the strengths of each of the partners. Nokia makes really great hardware, and some of their pieces of software are fantastic, but they do have issues with development environments, with developer evangelism.
Yep.
Their store, distribution of apps, the whole ecosystem around it. Microsoft is actually really good at that. So in that sense, it's great. The user interface is not fantastic, but from what I've heard of Windows Phone 7, the Windows Phone 7 user interface is extremely well thought out. Microsoft has great competencies there. That's just one level, though. I mean, that's a product level, and as we've seen with Palm Pre, that was a fantastic product that just didn't have any chance of success. But yeah, like what you said about Nokia buying RIM, because they sort of lack the channels into North American enterprise. They haven't had success there. Microsoft, they do and they don't. I mean, they certainly have a big sales force, but it hasn't. How much has it helped Windows Mobile over BlackBerry, over iPhone nowadays, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of they do have, in theory, they should be able to do better than they've been doing with Windows Mobile, but they haven't. And I don't know if that's so. I think this will help Microsoft, you know, worldwide. Certainly, massively, almost immediately increase their the Windows Phone 7 install base. But Microsoft hasn't really been very successful at using their channels to push Windows Mobile devices. And I don't know, you know, that even with Exchange integration for free rather than buying software from RIM to do it. So I don't know. I don't know that that it's actually going to be a huge success.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that totally. I think that they did have good success pushing Windows Mobile into the enterprise. I mean, Windows Mobile still has, what, like 7 or 8% market share, even though they've done jack all with that in the last 5 years, really. Like, their OS is 8 years old, and they still have, like, 7 or 8% of that market share. And
fair enough.
When they were proactively working on Windows Mobile, yeah, it was slowly following further and further behind the competition, but not at a rate of, like, not doing any work, and suddenly everybody was light years ahead. Once they got to 5 and 6 and they basically stopped innovating and they had to kind of reinvent their OS, and it took them 3 years to do it, that's when they lost all the ground because everybody else had way better stuff than they did. So they had access into enterprises, but enterprises said, your stuff just isn't as good. So I do think that that is a benefit to the relationship, is their relationship is having that enterprise channel. But when you look at Nokia and Microsoft, what you say, Anthony, is totally right. There's lots of synergies between those two companies in terms of what they each can bring to the table. And I think Rob is right. It almost makes sense that in order to make the most benefit from those synergies, they have to be one company. Yeah. So Apple owns their ecosystem and ships devices. RIM owns their ecosystem and ships devices. Well, who owns the ecosystem for Nokia and Microsoft? If they're sharing the store, like, how do you share a store? Somebody runs the store, right? Somebody decides what's on there. Somebody builds the OS. Yeah, they can work together on it, but ultimately, in order for it to be perfectly successful, if Microsoft wants to have Windows Phone 7 on non-Nokia devices, they still have to listen to the other partners, because they're going to be shipping lots of Windows Phone 7 devices as well. Yep. And if they don't, they're basically Nokia's OS. So it's one of those interesting cases where almost to ensure their long-term success, they will basically have to act as one company at the expense of all the other partners. But is that really what they should have done? Was that the right decision to take that path without doing the full-on merger?
Yeah. Well, but what would a full-on merger look like? So for Nokia, it could make a lot of sense. But Microsoft is a big, complex company, and could they actually? So it wouldn't be. I don't think it would be a merger of equals. Yeah. Although I don't know what Nokia's market cap is, but I mean, it would be Nokia is a division of the mobile division of Microsoft. But could Microsoft do that? I mean, is that something that would make sense for Microsoft? Like, could they take that degree of bet into mobile? And actually, I mean, is this something that could end well? Even if that's the path that they're on, could you, like, what would that look like?
It would be a hairy mess. Certainly, we're taking this from a perspective of the North American market, right? So, what happens on the European side, where Nokia is obviously dominant in not only smartphones but feature phones, because we don't see a lot of Nokia devices floating around North America. I don't know a single person who actually has a Nokia device.
Right.
So,
except for dumb phones and
like just standard phones, not smartphones, right. But. I don't know that it would have been a straight up. It would have been a Microsoft acquiring mode here, and I don't think that there is a good fit between these two guys yet as one company, because you're right. Nokia is never going to be the mobile division of Microsoft. And you know what? Everybody in Europe if we have anybody listening to this or watching this from Europe, they're rolling over right now in anger because of our lack of perception of what's going on in the rest of the world with these devices. Because, this is catastrophic for Nokia. This is catastrophic. They're talking about 20,000 layoffs, or more than that in terms of what's going on with them. So it's.
So why couldn't Microsoft buy them? So they're already talking about that. They're already talking about disrupting the European market. So why not? Why couldn't they operate as Microsoft's mobile division? Like what would be wrong with that? They don't have a lot of overlap in the two companies in terms of their expertise and the products that they build.
No, but would Microsoft want to get into manufacturing here? So
manufacture the Xbox.
But
this is true.
Do they own? They own that whole process. Yeah.
The Xbox is soup to nuts. They own the whole ecosystem from manufacturing the hardware all the way up through the software and the licensing, and that's a model that's been successful for them. It took them a few tries to do it, but basically, if they bought Nokia and brought them as their mobile division, they have high-end hardware already done, that engineering. They just have to then run the Windows Phone 7 OS on it and pair them together. It's the kind of thing where Microsoft would be like, okay, well, we'll build an Apple inside Microsoft, right? So now we don't have the cachet, but
would that, exactly. But would that, do you think that so part of Microsoft's obvious plan is anybody with a specific hardware structure, like a chassis, right, that they've laid out for their OS, can run, Windows Phone 7. So HTC, we'll talk about that in a second. But all the other manufacturers who are leveraging Windows Phone 7 would then be shut out, right? So it would be like basically Nokia's platform. They'd be building for Windows 7, certainly there's nothing wrong with that. Nobody's running iOS, nobody's running the BlackBerry OS, but everybody's running Android. And it's an interesting thing because they turned away from Android. Stephen Elop had some pretty sharp words about why they decided to go to Microsoft. versus an Android OS, which was basically Android is a commodity, and we don't want to play in that even realm that everybody else does. Windows Phone 7 is not, right?
Well, they're looking at it. I mean, it's the obvious irony of them turning to Microsoft, but people are looking at what happened. So this is the PC, struggle for platform dominance all over again, and everyone saw what owning the OS in the PC world did to Microsoft, right? Suddenly there was Microsoft, which was like 600 times as big as the next biggest software company, and like 100 times as big as the next biggest hardware company. I'm just pulling numbers out of my ass, but it's
probably right, though. Yeah,
gigantic. Right? Yep. So I mean, Google throwing a free open source OS into the mix is really interesting. Google doesn't own it. They sort of own it, but it's throwing a lot of power to the wrong person. Like they're kind of worried about spawning another Microsoft type dominance of mobility. Apple's not the one they're going to do it. They know what Apple's plan is. They're going to be extremely successful. They're doing what they did the first time around, but much better. Yeah. But it's partly defensive. Like you throw everything behind Android, and who the hell knows what kind of monster that's going to spawn, and that's going to start eating people up. That's what people did with Windows. Throw all the weight behind Windows, and suddenly Microsoft comes along and eats everybody else up.
And now they're the underdogs.
But if you look at the market share, what if you broke the market share down like this? 15% for Windows Phone 7, 15% for BlackBerry, 15% for iOS, which is 55% for Android. Yeah. So if Microsoft bought Nokia, they could get to that. Nokia's market share would go down because they would go down faster than they could recover it over the next 2 years. But say it settles out about even with RIM and Apple. So now you have two people you're competing against, because you're not competing against Android right away. All you have to do is you have to beat Apple, and you have to beat RIM. And Microsoft does very well against a limited number of competitors. They got a lot of cash they can throw at it. So does Apple, because they make a lot of money. RIM, a little bit less so, because they're a smaller company. But you don't even pay attention to Android. You try and beat those two and slowly move up. And as you move up, you leverage everything you have in Microsoft, which RIM doesn't have, which Apple doesn't have, because they only have a few percent, like 9% of the desktop market. Yeah. So Microsoft leverages their 91% of Windows market and 91% of business markets, and Android, Google can't do that because they don't have those advantages. So they would immediately buy equality with the second-level providers and then take their advantages and move up from there.
Yep. So you're talking about. I mean, you're talking about the same concept as the browser wars, the OS wars, the browser wars, right? The OS wars were lost early because of Microsoft, but the browser wars. You remember when IE came out and was dominant and knocked Netscape out of this world because of their dominance on the desktop platform, right? So Windows knocked out every other OS, and then IE knocked out every other browser. But now what we're finding right now is that IE is at the low. We said this, and this was stuff that was said out there. And, when IE came out and owned a 90% market share for browsers, they said it's over. The browser war is over, and they're at 55% now, right? They've been getting fed by Firefox and by Safari and by Chrome, and so there's now a battle going on here, and the OS world is doing the same thing. And I don't think, and I mean, here's a weird thing. I don't think that Android's going to win this, because Android is so splintered, and that's what Elop was saying, is that it's such a commodity. It is not open source, no matter what everybody says. It's not open source because Android or Google controls the release and when and what source is released and when the source is released. So that's not open source, man.
Yeah. So, but Google's got limited. So if Google's, Google doesn't. There's handsets coming from China, where Google is not even the default search engine on Android devices, right? So there's other manufacturers that have put Bing as a default search engine. Yep. So Google, I think, I don't know. Google almost did Android just to screw everything up, just to throw a huge monkey wrench into the system, so nobody could be dominant.
Well, no, Google did Android because it's an extension of an advertising platform. That's why it's free, right?
Well, but look at this analogy you made with IE is perfect, and the reason IE only has 55% is not necessarily because Microsoft tried and failed to keep 90%, because they didn't do anything with it again, right? It was like Windows Mobile. They went, okay, well, we're not doing anything with it for a few years. Well, everybody else catches up and passes them. So, if they pay attention in the short term, guaranteed Android's going to win. Short term, It's just a numbers battle right now. Android will be the #1 smartphone OS for the next I'd say 3 years for sure. Past that, we'll move pretty quickly, so I'd hedge on that point. But if Microsoft purchased an equal market share to RIM and Apple right now and paid attention to it, like Firefox did, like Chrome is doing to that market, I agree with you. Android isn't going to maintain 55 because of the way the market is structured. Microsoft could iterate faster and could gain that market share, and then do what they did. Just because they got to 90% with IE and dropped it, any other company would say, yeah, give me 90% and I'll run with it.
Yeah.
I'll take that 90% and I'll keep it. Microsoft went, oh, it's over, forget about it.
We won.
So, yeah,
they
gave
stood on
up.
the ship of a battleship. They stood on the deck of a battleship and said, combat is over, right? And then they let it die. Now, the real battle here is really about how much effort gets put into this. And I think that Microsoft has a distinct advantage, and people always knock Microsoft down, but they have a distinct advantage because they own the enterprise infrastructure for the most part. And whatever they do, whatever RIM does, there's still the RIM tax, which is the BES fees that go on top of all connectivity, and then they have to buy a BES, and they have to, there's a challenge in there. But I want to shift here because what's going on with this kind of decision, and I think there was actually money involved. There's rumors of kind of $200 or $300 million involved in this transaction between Nokia and Microsoft. But whatever it is, it's going to play out. It's done. But this announcement from HTC, so HTC, device manufacturer extraordinaire, massive growth over the last number of years, adoption of all platforms except for iOS. I mean, Windows Phone 7 and Android. I don't know about WebOS, but but HTC invests in some pretty odd things. First of all, they bought a mobile video platform provider, Saffron Digital, for about $50 million, and then they invested $40 million into OnLive, which is an online game streaming game service. So this must be an alarm. And Nokia could have seen their future in HTC as just a device manufacturer, no differentiation from anybody else. Is this the right thing for HTC to do as a device manufacturer? Get into this services play?
Yes,
it's a big change. I think.
These are but these are three monumental shifts that have just happened this week. Some big decisions being made.
HTC has decided that they don't just want to be a mass market hardware manufacturer. That's the choice they made. They looked at them and said, okay, look, the future is either we go what we've been doing in the past, which is be very successful mass marketing mobile devices. And whether it's running Android or whether it's running Windows Phone 7 or whether RIM contracts has to do BlackBerry in the future or whatever, they could be successful doing that, but there's a cap on what they can do because they have continuous price pressure to bring their price of their devices down, and they have no long-term trail of revenue on those devices. So it's always a numbers game. If someone takes 5% of their market, they lose 5% of their revenue right there. So this is basically insurance. HTC is saying, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to change our business model so we have some insurance against market share. We want to have all the success we have in devices now have some recurring revenue later on. And the way you do that is you own content. You have content for those devices that isn't available elsewhere to lock those users in.
But I can understand that. So I mean, I understand differentiation. I understand the fact that you want to put, take some money out of one pocket, put into another, or multiple sources of revenue. But getting into a mobile video platform and a gaming platform seems as far away from hardware as basically a hardware manufacturer as you can possibly get. And I'm not saying that this is a bad move at all. I'm saying that this is a gutsy move. This is a decision that I love people who make decisions like this that are out of left field, because this to me comes out of left field for a company like HTC. Hardware to get involved in the content side, to take an about face. $100 million.
Yeah,
it's probably a drop.
It's significant. It's I mean, it's almost like Foxconn just declaring that they're going to start building phones or something.
Yeah.
But
it's like the carriers
getting into the
phone.
So I'm going to offer an alternative, sort of an alternative theory of this, or a way of looking at it. So we're sort of looking at this. Because we're North America, we're pretty North American centric. Looking at what the smartphone market looks here. HTC is Taiwan based. They think a lot more about East Asia than we probably do, than someone like Apple probably does, or Microsoft. or RIM, just because of their location, because it's kind of the kind of relationships that they have.
Yep.
There's a couple of things. One is that there's no big innovative smartphone, company on the level of Apple or RIM or even HP or Palm in East Asia. Two is that there's a gigantic market that's waiting for smartphones in East Asia. So they could be totally not thinking in terms of, in the same terms that a North American company would. This might be a sort of more of a strategic thing. They're looking at East Asia. They're looking at a very different market. They're looking at, okay, well, we can dominate, the 2.5 billion people here, continue to manufacture things. Maybe this is where we want to be. Maybe we want the company to be the dominant, innovative smartphone company in the biggest market in the world, rather than North America. Forget about North America. We're going to position ourselves. So, gaming is gigantic in Korea and Japan and parts of East Asia in a way that it's not here. Streaming gaming can make a lot of sense. Video service that's really tailored to the specific markets can make a lot of sense. Search services that are tailored to the specific markets can make a lot of sense.
Yep.
Local OSs that are much more friendly to East Asian markets. Very different markets. They could be thinking in those terms instead of North America. They're not thinking about competing with Apple or anybody. They're thinking of, well, we're positioning ourselves for 3 years from now when things explode here. This is where we want to be.
And on that vein, which is, I agree with all of that, that if they said that, okay, we want to find some content that appeals to those areas and those users, and which one should we start with? And going back to your point, Rob, in terms of how different that content is from hardware, those are actually the two most close to hardware pieces of content you can get. The mobile video is about A, getting the video data to your phone, and B, processing the video in a battery-efficient manner to look good. Gaming is all about the power of your device to run games, whether it's 3D chips or whatever. So, owning the hardware, HTC can build devices that optimize the video quality on their video service and optimize what they can provide from online gaming by streaming it, by putting chips specifically in their devices that they're going to get massive volume discounts on because of what they build. Why is the iPhone successful? Video and gaming is what it was built on. Audio is not close to hardware. You can make audio work fine on like anything from 20 years ago. So those services are very, very close to the hardware level for HTC.
That's a good point. That's true.
So as we talk about all these hardware manufacturers and these streamlined systems where they're making the OS, they own that whole ecosystem, like Apple. There's this rumor, I don't even know if it's a rumor anymore, some people think it's substantiated, that Apple is actually going to be integrating something called like a software SIM into a universal phone in order to be able to become its own carrier, its own MVNO. Have you heard about this, that Apple and the integrated SIM, can they become their own carrier?
Yeah, that's certainly the first step to that is the software SIM that they're going to have, which is basically a reprogrammable SIM card built into their phone, so that instead of having to go to your carrier and say, let me into my contract, unlock my phone so I can go to another carrier, it's all done by software. So you don't have to your carrier do it. Apple can do it, or a software program can do that locking and unlocking for you. Kind of like if you jailbreak your phone now, you can download software to do that, to unlock your phone, but your SIM is still a carrier-specific SIM. So this is taking it one step further to totally reprogram your SIM with a different number, a different SIM number, I think, on it as well, which really helps for portability, especially in Europe when there's much more competition amongst carriers and amongst countries there as you're walking around. So it's a really good first step to freeing the phones from carriers even further than Apple already does by owning the entire ecosystem for their phone. And the next step from that is then saying, okay, well, now you have a phone that works on any carrier. Apple will just bulk buy airtime and become their own carrier. And then you won't have to worry about what carrier you're on. It'll just be a reprogrammable SIM that gets reprogrammed every time you walk into a new network that has cheaper airtime, and it'll be built to your iTunes account.
It just seems, it just seems a little bit. They're not their own carrier. They're basically reselling minutes ultimately, but they'll buy them in bulk and buy them at a deep discount. So you would have to ultimately buy an unlocked phone, separate from any carrier. So it's an unfinanced phone. There's no financing available for this. So you'd spend $600 on an iPhone, and then
Right.
basically be able to save that on not being locked into a 2 or 3 year contract, and you would get minutes probably at a cheaper rate than you would normally, and you'd probably be able to download an app.
Mm-hmm.
Said, look, I want to be on Rogers, I want to be on AT&T, and you'd be able to get onto those carriers, wouldn't you?
Although, you know what, if carriers are subsidizing based on minutes, if Apple was actually, becoming a virtual carrier, they could do the same thing. Charge a slight premium on their minutes, and they could subsidize the price of the phone too. So you go to the Apple store, you buy a phone, what carrier is it on? I don't really care.
Yeah, ultimately, it's one of those things where right now, Apple makes a lot of money on their iPhones. Like, that's a high revenue generator, high profit generator. Just like RIM makes a lot of money selling their hardware, their BlackBerry hardware. But as Apple ramps up their video, their audio, their apps, their content services, if they suddenly add minutes and data to that as well, the goal is to get to a point where your profit on a phone is much higher aftermarket, not on the initial sale, so that they can basically give their phone away for free and say we make more money by giving the phone away for free than having the barrier to entry of $700 or $800 or $900 to buy the phone. They can become a proxy. They can become the intermediary where people get their content and skim off the top their profits from that, just like they do on iTunes. They're taking 30% of what people sell for music and for video and for apps on iTunes, and the more pieces of content they can do that for, the better proxy they can be, the better content manager they can be, the better provider of those services they can be, the more appealing they are, the more appealing their ecosystem is, and the more users they can get in an ecosystem. The more users you have in your ecosystem, whether it's on iPhone, whether it's on BlackBerry, whether it's on Android, the value of that ecosystem is greater and greater and greater the more users you have. It's really a self-fulfilling prophecy of how do you get a valuable ecosystem? Get users. How do you get users? Have a valuable ecosystem. Have something they want in it. So the more Apple adds those services and provides more value and unique value for their phones, because all the Android manufacturers are not going to be able to do this because they don't have the market clout, they don't have the volume individually to be able to negotiate these deals. So Apple is going to say, well, if we can get to this point where we're big enough and we're powerful enough to negotiate these bulk buy deals, then basically they've leveraged themselves against carriers saying, well, we're not going to ship your phone, so deal with us. And Apple can say, screw you, we're just bulk buying minutes. You don't need to ship our phone. I don't have to have a deal with TELUS. I don't have to have a deal with T-Mobile or with AT&T or with Verizon to ship my phone. Because if they want to ship other people's phones, that's great. You can still use your iPhone on their networks because we're bulk buying minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's... So I'm still a steadfast believer that Apple is always, and for the foreseeable future, is going to be completely focused on just revenue through hardware sales. But I do agree with you. So, the ecosystem is a powerful way to increase hardware sales. And it's stuff that they're already doing, right? So they're already, when the iPhone first came out on AT&T, they offered the unlimited data plan. When it first came out in Rogers on Canada, they offered like an unprecedented, whatever it was, 30 gigabytes for $30 a month, which was huge. And it was because Apple said, well, if you want iPhone on your network, these are going to be the terms. You're going to have to do something really good for your customers. We saw that with the iPad, with the 3G plans that came along with it, data-only plans that had, on operators that had never offered data-only plans before, at much better rates. I think, so I agree that it's not outside the realm of possibility for Apple to start doing this, to start buying bulk minutes, to give their customers a better deal. But I think it's all just for the point of making iPhone the most attractive piece of hardware you can buy. So if I buy iPhone, I'm actually going to get a better per minute rate than on any other phone. And that's just another reason for me to buy an iPhone and for Apple to count me as another customer. I think that's the reason, but it's totally, one way or another, whether it's because they actually want to make a lot of profit off of this, which could be as a virtual carrier, as a content provider, or they just want to make a lot of profit off of phones. I think either way, it makes a lot of sense for them to do it. Now, whether
insurance, right?
Yeah.
Like you continue to sell your hardware until people aren't willing to pay the money. You keep making a lot of money off of it, and it's insurance against the carriers as well because they can basically have the carriers bribe them not to launch their white labeled carrier service. So they'll go into the carriers and say,
It's true.
We're thinking about launching this product here. We want to bulk. Carriers are like, oh crap, no, we don't want that. So we'll give you preferred terms, even though you don't have a agreement with us that's exclusive because AT&T's is up. They'll have something else. They'll have basically another hammer to hold, and that's all. Yeah. That's Apple what they always want, right? They want a hammer that they can hold over whatever partners are using to say, you know what? if you don't want to work with us, we'll drop this bomb on you, and that'll disrupt your business too much. So it's cheaper to give them a good deal than it is to worry about a business disruption.
Can you believe that it's only Apple that could think of, bringing carriers down to an app? Like, you go from a carrier to like the AT&T app in the App Store, and like those are the kind of maybe it's not forward thinking. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but that's the kind of thing that a strong decision maker, good leadership, good vision, like
enormous ego,
exactly. Like we could just shrink down some of the largest companies in the world and just put them in as little icons in the App Store. It's hysterical.
Well, it's great, and it's Steve Jobs has made no secret of his enmity for carriers, right?
Right.
He hates them. I mean, he said, this is not a PG podcast, he said that the carriers are the assholes that you have to go through to get to your customers.
Yep.
Right? He hates carriers, and everyone, I completely agree with him. But yeah, it's take him down. He hates, whoever he hates, he's just going to put them in his crosshairs and start firing at them.
I think so, and carriers have to look at differentiating their value prop, just like Nokia's done, just like HTC's done. You've got to start to think about, well, maybe these guys should be the credit card companies and doing microtransactions in the future, because that's a way that they can make revenue, because they're losing a ton of money on a number of things. But certainly if this software SIM comes to fruition, but also they used to make a lot of money in J2ME downloads for feature phones. That money's disappearing. The walled garden is crumbling. They have to start making money other ways. Because even if you look over the last number of years, we pay a lot of money for our connectivity, for cellular connectivity in Canada, but those prices have become commoditized and they're coming down. So something's got to give. They're subsidizing these devices, and if this is just a kind of a glimpse into what's going to happen, which maybe it's likely, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, but something like this is going to happen. Software SIMs are going to come along, and all of a sudden the carriers are going to be left with their pants down and saying, we're just an app? So it's time for them to make the decisions that guys like Nokia, that HTC have, and even HP have made over the last week. It's time for the carriers to bone up. And it's not a decision about how much effort it's going to take to get the iPhone on their platform. It's, hey, listen, what happens if the iPhone creates this, or if Apple creates this virtual SIM, software-based SIM that allows us to just become, like a current, where I go into, I plug my laptop in at a hotel and I just use their electricity. That's what a carrier is going to become, just somebody else's electricity. That's just crazy. I love it. So, guys, I think that it was a big week in mobile. Obviously, 3 big decisions, 3 tectonic shifts in the industry, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens over the next number of months as this thing shakes out. I can't wait to see what happens next week.
Agreed.
Maybe Bacon will get another job. 2 jobs.
I don't think I can handle that.
Wow. I think you can. There's just too much knowledge in your mind for just.
I can only talk so much during a week, and I'm going to be talking so much at this job, giving everybody my opinion all day, that it's going to be hard. It'd be hard to do that twice in every day. So.
Well, look. Speaking of opinions, whatever yours is, you're watching this out there. Whatever your opinion is, we'd love to hear it. Good, bad, ugly, whatever you want to say, bring it. We appreciate the comments that we've already received, and we relish those comments. So the more, the merrier. I look forward to interacting with many more of you guys and your comments, certainly on Twitter and where you found this thing posted, probably on untether.tv. Really appreciate the feedback. Guys, 4 episodes in. It's not a habit yet. I think 6 weeks is a habit. So we'll endeavor to get through this. I look forward to seeing what the next week brings. Thanks for doing this. Episode number 4. Done. Can you believe it?
See you next week.
4.
All right.
See you next week.
Thanks, guys.